Hey everybody, tafony here once again, and today I am rambling about the Squarp Instruments Hermod Plus. It is a eurorack sequencer. It was the #1 slot in the rambling about every eurorack sequencer ranking, all of the ones that I've tried video, if you are coming from that one. It's funny rewatching that later on, not intentionally at all, but like I was watching it back when I was editing it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even really talk about Hermod, which was the top of the list. I just put it at the top and then talked about something else. So that's okay, because today let's take the opportunity to get into and actually talk about Hermod at some depth. And before we do that, some housekeeping. I purchased the Hermod Plus with my own money, used off a local-ish seller here in Canada. I'm not affiliated with Squarp. I use my own money to buy it. It's not sponsored by them or anyone else. I'm not a journalist. I'm not reviewing this. I'm not here to present it. This is just like a video blog about my journeys in hardware synthesizers. And normally at this point in the video I say, it sounds like this. But today we're just going to go into the workflow, because what does a sequencer sound like? Well, whatever you drive with it. So we are going to do some sound demos for sure, but just to get started today, I want to dive right in. So what is Hermod Plus? Well, it is the updated version of the non-Plus original Hermod, which I also had. It is a 26 HP modular brain, they call it. It is great at driving step sequences on board. It is great at converting MIDI to USB, or driving internally one of the 8 CV gate pairs, which can also be converted to LFOs or modulation, or I believe there's voltage sequencing as well, and not in a like pitch way, but you can do sort of like what I like to do with the voltage block and drive some stuff like that. And then there's also, as well, if we go into track view, there's not only the 8 CV gate pairs, but 8 MIDI tracks as well. So it is 16 track sequencer, but limited to 8 CV gate pairs and 8 MIDI pairs. There might be a way to use 16 tracks of MIDI, if I'm not mistaken, but I may be, and there's no way to get more than 8 CV gate pairs out of this, obviously, because you're limited by the hardware. Now, there is ways to modulate it externally. There's these assignable gate inputs, or assignable voltage inputs. I've never used any of them in mine. In my mind, the modular brain does not get driven by other things, not because I'm a stickler for like a power dynamic or something like that. It's just that, like, I don't know, if anybody's going to be modulating anything, it's going to be the Hermod sending it modulation. So without further ado, we're going to be using a lot of this printed manual. I think printed manuals are awesome, and if there ever was something that could use a printed manual, it's going to be the Hermod. So today we are going to be relying a lot on the Hermod manual. So here's the Hermod Plus quick start, 16 track. We already mentioned that, 16 tracks, 16 patterns, 8 effects per track, and I'll go into that in a moment. It says grid-free polyphonic step sequencer. Interesting. Live recorder and modulation editing. We're going to try and get into that today. Back-to-back projects for endless performances. It's like not song mode, but you can like queue it up. I don't think we're going to get to that today, but let's see how we do. There's our 8 CV gate outputs, as I mentioned. There is the 8 MIDI channels that I mentioned, and there is, as they call it, extensive connectivity. Now, you'll see on mine, I have a plug out of the MIDI out, which I used to drive the Bitbox Micro over a 3.5mm cable, TRS cable. I believe this, both on the MIDI in and outside, it will take both Type A and Type B, but definitely check the manual for what you're trying to connect to it. There is the clock and reset out of it as well. And I want to first jump into something that right off the rip, I think this was even in the Red Means Recording video as well, that in the global settings, so there's a button, and what I always say about like not requiring the manual to do everything on modules, I find really, really important, because right here, all of the button combos are listed on the buttons. Now, I always say, if you have your tafony rambling about bingo card ready, I hate button combos. I hate requiring the manual to do basic stuff. But on here, it's easy to tell where you need to go, as long as you can remember that these color-coded items are how the button combos are assigned. So what we want to do is go to the global settings. So you see the settings text on the Y button is yellow, so that means we go to the track view and the settings here. This doesn't mean it's associated with the track. It's just to say that like that's the button combo of sorts. Now you don't have to hold the track to do it, but if you hit the Y key on the track view, you get the settings button. Now so within this language, before I get into the settings, I'll just say on the X button on the yellow word is voices, so we hit Y, it'll take us into the voices view, and if we go into the step view and we hit the X, it'll be zoom because it's in green. We hold it down in this case, and you can adjust the zoom of your sequencer. I don't want to do that right now, but if we go to red, it'll be rack. I don't know if I'm using rack, I guess. If we do sequencer, this one is song. We can get into song mode here, but we want to get to the global settings. So I can see on the Y button, there is settings in yellow. We'll go to yellow, which is track. We hit settings. This isn't per track. This is just how that button combo is. Now, sync in, sync out. Sync in, I'm not using. I want to set my clock source internal. I've already done that. I don't want to, again, use external sync in and out. I want the Hermod to drive everything because it is my modular brain. MIDI, I'm sending it clock, USB I am also, we've got clock on stop, we've got all of this. Now clock out rate, I had to drop it down to 4 parts per quarter note because I originally was driving the Modbat Performer from it, and the Modbat Performer didn't like the 24 parts per quarter note that PAMS did, and that's okay. Going forward, I may adjust this all to be 24 ppqn to make PAMS happy, and then I will clock divide PAMS based on that, but we'll see if we get there. MIDI in, I will probably be setting this up later if we get to that today, but yeah, you have lots of settings for active track port, there's active track channel, pitch bend, all of these things, so we'll get to that. MIDI through as well, you can have it send like you are familiar you're familiar with basic MIDI stuff here if you're here, but you can have Hermod be one step in a MIDI chain that continues on without it. And then if we get to the next page, there's CV gate in. This is where I was talking about how you can assign all of these inputs to other things. I don't plan to do that today. Here's some MISC settings. Auto load, I'm actually going to turn auto load off because I don't really appreciate it. Let's see if we can bring the brightness down. No, all the way up. 200%. Well, that's interesting. I like the brightness of that, but can I do the... No, that's okay. That's okay. So recording settings, multi-track recording, looper, hard record. I think we're going to have to get into this later on. And then one thing that I will say that you do have to save here, because when I first got this thing, I think I was even in the studio with it, is every time I would turn on the system, wow, my PPQN had reverted, or wow, I have external sync had come back. But what you actually have to do is come in here and say settings saved. So I think even in the Red Means recording video, Jeremy mentioned that, which is funny because I had the same issue. So tuner, I think this actually has a tuning function that we will not use today, but it actually has an onboard tuning thing that is supposed to be really powerful for getting all your voices in order, but that's cool. We have some analog monitors here. Oops, I have backed out. And then info. It'll actually tell you what your CPU load is at and everything, which is interesting. I've never run into CPU problems here, but if you have, let me know in the comments. Yeah, it's funny, at idle it's at 16%, if that's of any interest to you. Okay, where we're going to start here in the structure of the Hermod. Let's consult the manual. So I'm going to steal straight from them because they could explain it way better than I ever could, but it's important to me that we cover this without misspeaking, that's for sure. So each of the 8 voices of Hermod Plus, the CV gate outputs, is controlled by a track. A track can be configured to control more than one voice. For polyphonic use or for velocity and aftertouch playback, a track can also be used as a modulation track to allow recording and playback of CV and CC messages. So, and it can also be LFOs, it can also be envelopes, it can also be lots of other things, but we'll keep going on here. A project can include up to 16 tracks. A project includes up to 16 tracks. Each of these tracks contains 16 patterns, which are arrangements of notes, gates, or modulations. An effect rack with up to 8 effects. Then a mod matrix to control effect parameters using control voltage. A mod matrix to control effect parameters using control voltage or CC, which is MIDI. A unlimited number of Hermod Plus projects can be stored on the SD card. They can be saved and loaded without stopping playback for seamless project transitions. Interesting. I wonder how that would actually work workflow-wise. Okay, so we're going to borrow from the manual here. So the user interface of Hermod Plus is designed around 4 main modes. There is step, inspect and edit patterns, add or edit notes, gates, and modulations, set the length of the current pattern. So this is the step mode. It has associated buttons, but I find like as you get into the Hermod, these are kind of limited to steps, like the actual use of these pads here, because the micro timings, the different divisions of the length. You'll see what I mean. Like if I can jump way ahead here just to show you, if we hit the generator, we generate a sequence, then we've gone way more, we've got way more definition here than we do on this 16 track grid, right? So anyways, just to say that, like, yes, it's there, but, you know, consider that it can have a fidelity far beyond those 18 steps, right? So that's the step. There is the effects. Now there is 8 different effects slots here. They can modulate each other. They can be different things. Let's go through all of these real quick. There's an arpeggiator. There is a chance for probability. There is a echo, a MIDI echo. Now remember, this isn't audio delay or echo. It's sort of like, you know, I think of what echo looks like in terms of a sequencer. I have never used it. However, it is there. Envelope is actually really cool because you can send different, well, envelopes, obviously, instead of just gates. So very cool. Euclidean mode, I've never used that, but maybe we'll get to it today. There is filter. I'm not actually sure that works, but glide, you know, glide, portamento. Harmonics, I believe you can send a separate track that's sort of like intervals and stuff too, if I'm not mistaken, but we better go through that. The LFO track, I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate Hermod being able to send LFOs and not needing a separate module to do it. However, I think the effect here has like internal modulation in use of this LFO, so let's check that out. We have 2 note, I think this is like step skipping, 2 CC, I'm not sure, random for some more probability stuff, ratcheting, you know, ratcheting, scale I always use, which I always think is funny, it's like way at the back here, but this is probably in alphabetical order, isn't it? Yes, it is. That would explain it. Swing, this is interesting. I don't know if I want swing per track necessarily, but if you do, you definitely could, and you can get real deep with it here. And with all that being said, let's jump over to the track view. So track, mute, unmute tracks, set up voices, layout, and enter our global settings. You see that I'm on the first track. You can mute and unmute in this way. Now, they aren't illuminated right now when they're empty, so it kind of helps you see, you know, there's 16 tracks here, but it doesn't light up the ones that are empty because you don't need to mute or unmute them. But hey, that's what they're there for. And we went over the global settings a little prematurely, so that's okay. We're going to go over to our sequencer view now, so we can set the currently playing sequence on the fly, change playback style between sequences, and chain a program sequence, and access the save load menu. Now, this one, I've never actually really run the different sync settings, the sync run, restart, and whatnot, but it's in its current configuration on my unit when you hit the next sequence, it'll cue it, and then you know how like a drum machine is when you switch programs. Usually it'll cue it up, run through its current loop, and then go. And then I always just leave that on. If I wanted it to jump immediately, I would just press and unpress the play button. So let's go into the next step of the manual. Global settings, we've already talked about this. There's a sync in and out, MIDI in and out through. There is the project. Now I want to show you something real quick out of here, that there is the BPM, and I think if you hold this down, it'll show you the BPM. I have it internal. Let's bring our BPM up to 130 for fun. I originally took this as meaning you had to hold them both down, which does work, but I think you can hold the record down and do the same. No. I don't know why that is. Maybe there's a way to tap. No. Anyway, you just hold down the play button and it'll bring up the BPM menu, so that's just fine. There is the track mutes in the track view. What we're talking about, as the manual describes, the project, the architecture of the project, right? So we have our tempo, we had our track mutes, we have our sequences, run modes, and loop sync, and we had our set of 16 tracks, which is below. I'm going to go back to the first one. So that is all good there. We have wired up the unit, obviously. Now, so what I want to do first here, we've got our project. It's named AAA because typing on an encoder is not easy. We want to go to a track, and I just want to start this whole thing off by doing 4 on the floor. And let's bring in some levels so you can hear that. So we got techno, we got drums going first. So I want to do the world's simplest drum kit to get us going. Let's go on to the second track here. So I'm just punching these in on the grid view, and let's see what we got going on here. Where is my snare at? So this one here, I've already patched these up. So that first kick is from the battering ram. You can probably see it to the side. And then let's do our snare. I've already patched this up to the Timpleggio, but let's just put in a snare. And yeah, we got techno. So so we have techno, but we want to bring in a voice. So what I am going to do now, let's actually, I feel like for me, sequencing drums is my favorite part, and I'm going to just finish out our drum track first before we go into doing a voice. So, so let's get our voice going. Now I want to show you, this is my hi-hat track. So yeah, super simple, just sending some closed hi-hat notes here, but what I'm going to do is get this like extra dense. I'm leaving my first kicks out of the first 4 notes, but what I'm going to do is add some effects. So we talked before about our chance effect, which I'm going to use to bring in some probability. So this is super dense, but I'm going to randomize it a bit by bringing down some chance. So the hi-hat can be a little more, you know, random. And hopefully that can just spice up our track a little bit. Now, put some chance on that one. I like it. Now let's do a synth voice. And now I didn't extend the gate length of the other channels because, you know, the snare and the kick are 4 on the floor. They're super straightforward. But on our first channel, I am going to do a little bit of this. You know what, let's change our snare sound to the plonk. Let me do a little. Yeah, not the most exciting thing. Okay, but what we are going to do now is use our Timpleggio to be our synth voice, which is a tad unusual, but I also remember really liking it. We'll see if that was or wasn't accurate. And then take our output out of that one and send the temp directly into the bagger. Yeah. Okay. So now I'll show you track mutes real quick here as a byproduct of what we were just talking about. We're going to go in and mute our kicks. Oops. So yeah, now we are still running the sequence, but we just want to make it a little less dense. So you know what, I'm actually going to leave the kick, and then we'll go and do our step sequence on track 1. I love having these dedicated buttons. It's really easy to jump around. Now, what I want to show you all first, because I really, really appreciate this feature, is the... Well, first, let's extend our length. First, let's extend our length, and then I'll talk about that. So I want to bring this up to 64 steps. And I want to show you quick, if we go back to the other tracks, they did remain at 16 steps, which is great because I want to, you know, let these run. And then I'll show you quickly on this view. You can also see that it's previewing. This is really useful to me, I think, if for no other reason than it helps you tell where your transitions would be, because you don't want to chop your melody off that, you know, prematurely, right? So now you'll see I've muted the other snare track there, so it's got this sort of jagged pattern, and the first track is also muted, and it is at a different division because it's taking longer to reach the end. Now let's unmute our first track. There's no notes in there, so it doesn't matter. I'll just show you quickly unmuting that hat track. That's okay. We don't need it for now anyway, but I do want to show you this. So let's make a melodic sequence using the noise engineering Timplegio as a bass voice. So what you can do manual here. There's lots of different ways to do this here, but we're going to do like the most straightforward first. So you can just enter notes manually. And the way you do that, just hit it on the grid here. And if you hold it down, you can change the note. And I will say right off the rip here, oops, I don't think I was holding it. You can, so one way to do it, you go C6, I'll enter a C6 here, I will bring it up to a C7, enter that there, bring it back down a little bit to a D, we'll enter that there. It's sort of, I really appreciate that. It's really easy to do, however, let me just keep going. Get over to the next page. You can also, so once you've edited it, or sorry, once you've entered them, if you want to edit them, hold them down. You can just change them in that way. I really like it. We hold that and bring it up. Now what you're going to see right off the rip is, oops, I didn't mean to hit that step, but that's okay. Pretending I'm doing this really intentionally, right? Now, I'm doing this in a way to show you that it's out of key. It sounds a little wonky, a little unintentional. And we are going to make some intentionality happen here by going to the effects. And we're going to add a new effect by hitting enter. And we are going to use the scale. So right now, they do it a little differently than other every sequencer sort of has its own language around scales, but it has no scaler is what they call the effect. Okay, well, we have the color, and so sometimes sequencers use either what they call color or what they call scale here. Like they'll either say dominant, Mixolydian, major, minor being Dorian, but this one sort of does both. So I don't think there's a way you can... Sorry, I'm going to really show how little music theory I know here, but yeah, okay, no, never mind. So yeah, okay, so you can go, if I want to do a minor Phrygian in that way. That is usually a good scale. I want to put this scale though in not C, because it's really easy to get into C minor a lot in electronic music because it's the default, and I like that. So with this enabled, it's going to lock my notes into the grid, and suddenly it sounds a lot more intentional. Now, in the case of the timp, these are triggers, so the length of it doesn't matter because timp handles its own envelope. But if you want to change the length of a note, you just hit enter, and then you saw on the right side it got into the note length, and you can get super short and super long. Now you don't hear a difference in this example because the timp does not have a gate input, it just has a trigger input, but that's okay. I just want to show you how that would work in the case of a different one that did have a gate input. Now this is fine and dandy, but what we want to use this for a lot of the time, I really like this, and sorry if this sort of feels a little bit like cheating. So what we want to do, generator settings, we're going to come in here and go quantize. I want to keep this to like 16, which is the default, or else it gets like way almost swingy, if that makes any sense. I want my density to be kind of low too. You never really, it's funny, it starts with like super high values, but you don't really want it to go like above 50% in my mind. The start and stop, not the note min and the note max, you want these to be in an octave that's not too high or low. I'm not too concerned about the start and stop in this case if I'm using a scalar effect. That's okay. Note min and max, I don't want to have a whole bar, but I do want to, like, you know, have some randomness here. So let's try this, and then not using velocity, so we can ignore that. We're going to hit randomize. Yeah. Like, there's probably an ethics question somewhere in there about using generated melodies, but you can't argue that it's super powerful, and I really like how this sounds. So let's try and do a little noodling with the timp. Yeah, I really like that. Now if you go into effects, I don't know if there's anything else we should be using here. Anyway, that just, like, the first time I ever did that, I was like, you know, I've tried Cupid Bloom, I've tried all Renee, I've tried all these, like, generative sequencing things, and, like, I don't know, like, I know that's not going to evolve or anything like that, but, like, I don't know, that's tremendously powerful to me. If you want to focus on sound design and you can just generate a sequence like that, that sounds good, I don't know, that's huge. And when I sold Hermod originally and rebought it, I was like, God, where was I without that? I mean, you can enter all of these things manually, and I do intend to do that, but I don't know, that is such an easy way to get started. Now, I do want to try something new here with our 7th track. And where is the 7th track going? This is our open hat. I think I'm actually muting that hat, so let's bring the other hat. So in our open hat track, I'm going to take this out of here, and I want to try today the Euclidean one. So note input. Okay, interesting. I wonder why. So we're just going to do C1 because it doesn't matter in this case. I'm not sending any pitch to our hi-hat module. I'm not sending any pitch to our hi-hat module. Let's do steps. Yeah, you know what? Here's Euclidean, right? I bet it'd be really cool we'll do assign CV to these values. Rotate it. Now I think I don't have mod assign, but you could modulate it through the mod matrix. That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, so there's a Euclidean. If I add triggers here, what happens? Very cool. I don't think this is doing anything because I have that. But yeah, it's just like easy sequencing. I really appreciate that about the Hermod. Now, let's try and do a little bit of chaining here, which in truth, most of my time here, most of my time with the Hermod is stuck in 4-bar loop territory. I'm sorry to say. I promise I'm not much different from most electronic musicians, but that's okay. When I'm in the studio, to be totally honest, we like track it up and reset the sequence and then do a new sequence. But today, I think we should try and actually chain this. So let's hear. One quick thing I'm going to do is enable our hat sounds. This is how this one sounds. Now let's see if I can figure out how to copy. Hold on. Ready to duplicate. Okay, yes, I really like that. So here we go. What I have here, easy way to sort of do a little bit of variation here is we're going to copy the sequence. So we hold it. It says ready to duplicate. Press empty seq. So we duplicated it to sequence 2. Now I am on sequence 1 right now. Queue up sequence 2, and now it's going to swap over. Now it doesn't sound any different because it's the same sequence. Now let's go in and make some changes to said sequence. So maybe for fun we'll make our kicks a little more sparse. And then maybe we'll just, I want to like keep this melody rolling, so maybe I'll just make this a little more dense. I think I just screwed up here. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. What I want to do is disable track, so we're gonna just make this a little sparser for sort of like a, you know, we're not using like a very like verse chorusy song structure, right? So we're just gonna do a little bit of, you know, techno-y, taking away some elements, right? So maybe we'll take our Euclidean hat out in this version. Noticing one little thing rambling about is called just that, because it is just that. Because I increased the color or the brightness of my LEDs, you can't actually see when the cursor is crossing those other ones because they're already fully bright. That's okay. That's why it just kind of looks like it's doing this. Just a little side note. So yeah, we just have a little bit simple sequence running here, right? So let's go back into the other one, cue it up. Now I think my idea of doing the snare a little more dense didn't quite work out, so let's just, yeah. Bring it back in the first one. you could make a extremely long, deep, chained song sequence by virtue of doing a whole bunch of these, but we're already at 42 minutes, so I want to move on. So in hopes of not getting too carried away with this one today, I think we're going to call it there. In the next video, I'm going to do some MIDI to CV conversion and some controlling of MIDI devices like the Bitbox Micro, but I want to also show you how to connect peripheral USB devices. But in the interest of keeping this short, sweet, digestible, it's not even short, it's not even sweet, but I just wanted to avoid swooning too much and show you the basic workflows, because I feel like sometimes when you watch those videos that come out on these devices, they rapid fire all the things that are great about it, but you don't really get a feel for what it's actually like to jump in and make a song specifically, right? They have the sense to cut out the, diving through the menus and setting up your tracks and everything that I do not have the sense to. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to play us out with that little ditty that we put together, but I'm Tafony. Thank you so much for watching. There will be a more rambling about on this one for sure, so stay tuned for that. All right, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Talk to you soon.